Welcome to the virtual edition of Africa Travel Week. I am Naledi Cabo of the Africa Tourism Association, and I'm excited to facilitate a discussion around maximizing the impact of sports tourism. Sports tourism is one of the fastest growing sectors in the industry. Sports events are being used with increasing frequency to build the brand of their host destination. Manyo, I'd like to welcome you first to kick things off. The biggest new story before COVID, I should say, around the continent was the announcement of the NBA's decision to create the Basketball Africa League. As Vice President, can you please walk us through that decision and the goals and objectives of the league?
Sure. So when we talk about the Basketball Africa League, you have to put it in context within the NBA's engagement with the African continent, over the past 3 decades, highlighted by in 2010, we opened up an office in Johannesburg with the goal of, really growing and expanding the brand and the business of the NBA across the African continent. Right from the beginning, we noted that at some point in our evolution, it was going to be important for us to have a product that would be on the continent in prime time, that would be developed for the African continent with African talent, at a very high elite level. So this was a seed that we planted very early on, and 10 years into, our journey of growing the NBA's business across the continent, we were able to bring that to fruition. Now, we were, a week away from launching, and then COVID hit. The whole team was gathered here in Dakar, ready to go. And then unfortunately, we had to postpone. We are now, in the process of very shortly, we'll be making an announcement of our relaunch date, so stay tuned.
So, given the delay, what was the launch supposed to look like pre-COVID, and what will it look like now?
Sure. So pre-COVID, and we like to say pre-COVID and post-COVID, the idea is to have a 12-team league that is really the top tier elite club competition for the African continent. As you know, there are 54 countries on the African continent. So how do you develop a structure that really is able to be the umbrella tournament for the entire continent? And the way we developed it was to say there are 6 countries that we feel is important due to economics, due to population, due to basketball history, that it was going to be important for them to be in this league on an ongoing basis. But then we also wanted to make sure that there were slots left open for the rest of the continent to be able to participate. And so the 6 countries whose club champions in any given year automatically qualify into the BAL are Angola, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, Tunisia, and Algeria. And the other 6 slots are then up for qualification tournaments, and so those then get hosted with our partner FIBA over the rest of the year. And this coming year, those 6 slots are taken up by Cameroon, Madagascar, Mali, Mozambique, and Rwanda. The games were going to be played in the 6 countries: Angola, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, Tunisia, and Algeria. And the whole idea there is that, we are creating destination, by appointment viewing. We're really using this as a way to showcase and market the African continent, and really say to the world and also to Africa itself that these incredible cities of Kigali, of Lagos, these are cities that are world class, great infrastructure, incredible, from a cultural standpoint, music, food, fashion, entertainment, but yet the world doesn't really notice and appreciate it. And we feel that with the NBA's support and the brand of the BAL, we'll be able to really showcase that to the world by, not only attracting, fans from the diaspora to, come and take in the BAL games, but also be able to market within the African continent.
Michael, I'd like to ask you, just because of your private and public sector engagement as part of Africa Business Group, what are your thoughts around destinations and working with organizations such as the BAL and spotlighting destinations and the contribution of sports in terms of economic development? And even when you think about the teams are moving and what that, moving teams, moving fans, and what impact that has.
No, thank you, Naledi. I think that there's tremendous opportunity to replicate what you see happening in Europe, South America, the US, Asia, with fans following their teams as they, again, the brands get built, the value of the clubs grows, and then the entertainment and the tourism, that Mani was talking about, becomes almost intertwined with the game itself. Yes, I went to see the game, but there was a party, there was a concert, there was a fashion show. We think of our All-Star Weekend in the U.S. for the NBA. Again, pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's March Madness now. The tournaments, those become ubiquitous with, in many cases, thousands of people coming. And so, to me, when I at the beginning of January, we launched the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is trade and tourism. It's a great opportunity for intra-African trade, which to me should be as big as or bigger than, the games will be big, but the tourism that's happening on the continent in terms of intra-African trade is what I think that we often lose concept of, in terms of, we think of tourists coming from off the continent as the big ticket. When you actually look at the numbers, it's Africans traveling around the continent. Now, it's often for business, it's often to visit family, but if we can start doing things around the sport, we're all excited here in South Africa that Patrice Motsepe is the head of CAF, because there's a huge opportunity now in South Africa being, along with Egypt, along with Nigeria, one of the wealthier countries on the continent, and with a very strong football fan base, people can travel and come and see their fans. But you have to, I guess the closing thought that I'll have is, there's a lot of work in popularizing not just the sport, but all the things that go into making an extravaganza. You build up a local industry around that, and that's critical, because the hotel has to be on point. I can't get food poisoning. I need transportation everywhere. It's got to be safe. Right. Got to be safe. And then, it opens up to other parts of the world. So you can definitely have people come from the diaspora. And I think that's also, an exciting opportunity. So it becomes, again, we talked about destination activity. That this is happening at a certain time of the year. Where are you going to be? I'm going to be there. Are you going this year? Those are the kind of things that I'm looking forward to, because it spurs investment in all the ecosystem that goes around it. And, that to me is quite catalytic for growth on the continent.
Just, Kyle, I'd like to shoot it over to you from an infrastructure perspective, especially, and in your role or QA venues, being responsible for managing various venues across the continent. What do you think your role is in terms of the community and economic development, and some of your challenges as well as opportunities?
Yeah, look, I think with everything that's been said, at the end of the day, these sporting activities need a home to take place in. And ultimately, what that showcase is really adds to, points like what Michael was saying across, wow, I didn't know this was in Africa, and this is what we have. Our role from a community perspective is making sure that we put the best show on the table. And infrastructure plays a massive role in bringing that together. You can have an amazing product, but if you're not doing it in the right spaces, doing it at the right level, naturally that product becomes a sort of sub-level product that the world is not that interested in. Now, for us, we saw that as a business and said to ourselves, well, if we are going to take part in this future growth of the African continent, then with our expertise, we got to really take a hold of these arenas across the continent and bring them up to the level that a entity like BAL can come in and host and not have that clear distinction between the NBA product and the BAL product. It's got to be the same aspect. Now with that, if we get that system right and that system in order, what then happens is a ripple effect across the entire industry. And that's where you really start to see the impact. These institutions are bringing a large amount of investment into the continent. And if you're not structuring out that flow of investment into the market from a basic thing like service providers, you don't really get that impact that you should have. And I think that's where we play a critical role, is in the fact that if these things are run the right way, if the infrastructure is built the right way, then naturally that impact is going to flow right through into the economy, because this is really where the product takes place, and ultimately we want to make sure we're putting the best product on. So I think surface level, that's our impact from a venue perspective.
And from a venue perspective, when I think about events and, let's say, conferencing, for example, in sort of the traditional tourist lens, there's definitely a lot of engagement from tourism officials in terms of like bidding to host conferences and festivals and the like. And I'm wondering, are you getting that level of engagement, or have you thought about that? Or what's the level of collaboration that you have with those parties in the various destinations where you manage venues in terms of bringing events and collaborating with them in promoting the destination for that purpose?
Well, look, I think we are probably in one of the most amazing situations, and I must take my hat off to what's happening in Rwanda. We're very fortunate in being given the management role for the Kigali Arena, and what we're seeing on a daily basis. If we look back at Rwanda 4 or 5 years ago, from a MICE industry, the country was, I wouldn't say nowhere, but had a clear plan of where they wanted to be. The country sits second on the African continent in terms of their MICE industry. What these guys have figured out is exactly what the process is in getting a country to a point in being able to showcase their product to the world. And with that, I mean, we every day are in conversations, because the angle now is, we've achieved great things from a MICE industry perspective, but we have all of these people coming into the market. I mean, they've got the CHOGM in June, and a big component of that is, how do we entertain the people coming into the space? What is there for people to do when they're in the space? Mm-hmm. So as a government, what they've done is sort of shifted their viewpoint, not to say that they're ignoring the MICE industry, but what they're doing now is saying, well, we've done it with the MICE industry, let's become the hub for entertainment and sports. And with that, you see this amazing arena being built. And on top of that, what the government does is then reach out to the private sector to say, we need somebody to manage this space, so that we don't fall into the usual situation of arenas becoming white elephants that don't get maintained, that don't get managed, and just become a cost to the state. So we're seeing it in a big way. And I think second to South Africa, who did a very successful FIFA World Cup, and they've hosted many events after that. I mean, they sit as one of the top in terms of the Ironman competition. A huge amount of internationals go in for an event like that. Rwanda is doing the same thing, and the beautiful piece about that is that it's starting to trickle across the continent in realizing the impact of these sporting initiatives. And the results are phenomenal. You know, if we look at, I guess we can take one aspect, it's slightly off from a sporting perspective. Again, using Rwanda as a model, you look at what they did with the gorilla component, and you see the amount of people that are coming into the country because of that. Now, if you set up a calendar of sporting events that are consistent throughout the year, you've got that consistent travel of international people coming into the market. And the numbers are exponential in terms of impact. So we're seeing it, and it's a beautiful thing happening across the continent.
And in Rwanda and otherwise, how have you managed utilization in terms of during this downturn for COVID? In terms of like the lack of large scale events, have you sort of pivoted at all in doing smaller scale events? Are you hosting business events in places where you may have been? If you could just share a quick insight in that regard.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been a very exciting period over the COVID time. You know, our business literally has gone to 0% capacity from a business activity point of view. However, you know, venues, events are synonymous with the digital world, based on the fact that, you know, events are going online, social media is a massive contributor to the success of events. So naturally, as a business, we pivoted towards digital components. You know, a lot of it is really governed by the regulations, COVID regulations within the market, and we have to respect those. But it continues to force a real sense of innovation around how you position this venue. And on this piece specifically, there's two key components, digital being one of them. And what we've done with our partners internal is set up a recording studio. So what we do have now is a lot of people coming in to record content. You know, it increases our business capacity, not substantially, but at least it's not a zero base. And then the second component is sponsorships. Now, our sort of coming out of COVID, what we've really packaged as a business model to combat COVID is generating content, building social media pages in a big way. And this is honestly a 2-3 year project. But naturally, the more of a following and the more of a captive audience you have, sponsorships becomes a big component of your business. And we can sell that in a big way, which we have. And, you know, coming out of COVID, we have successfully put together sponsorship packages that are now being rolled out. And you know, we're excited to know that should there be COVID in the next 2 years, I think we've got a model that will combat that. And we can continue to look after these venues so that when BAL or any other event comes in, we are delivering services at the highest level.
Thank you. Autumn, I wanted you to address brand position and marketing. You know, your company, Kigali Forward, is dedicated to expanding narrative. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on how do we use sports as a catalyst to reform or reframe, I should say, the brand Africa narrative within Africa, and then also sort of shifting that Western gaze in terms of what Africa has to offer, touching on to, you know, some of the things that Manya was saying in terms of what this does in terms of showcasing what we have to offer from a product perspective and an experience perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what Michael and Manya were saying around the surprise that people express when they come and they're like, oh, this is Africa. Or when they see things on social media and they see the infrastructure, or they see large buildings or things that look like the cities that they live in different parts of the world, and they're surprised, yet and still in 2021, right? And so I think that that's one thing, is around being able to brand and being able to show the infrastructure and capabilities of cities and nations to be able to execute events such as these, because that doesn't just show that you can bring a sporting event, it shows the capacity to which you're operating, it shows the level of structure that exists in the country, and that gets a different nod and it starts to shift how people look at not just that country, but, I say all the time, how we use that, the fact that a lot of people look all the time at what happens in one country in Africa on the negative side to just generalize that that's happening in Africa. How do we use that with the positive in the same way? So that when people see that this one city and cities outside of, Joburg, Cairo, and the large cities that they're already used to seeing, but, when they see Angola, they see Rwanda, they see these other countries and other cities are hosting, that it can open their eyes to other countries across the 54 nations that they have not thought about before, and to know that this is possible on the continent, this can and does exist. So I feel like that's one of the biggest things. And then just how we maximize it, that, it doesn't, I think All-Star Weekend was a great example. As someone said, it doesn't just become about people coming from the game. The majority of people who travel around, and people travel annually in the US for All-Star Weekend, they don't go to the game. Most people who travel, it becomes about the fact that you're coming because this thing is happening, but it's more around the large event versus the actual game that is associated with it itself. And so how do we also do that on the continent so that we actually turn this into a larger experience? And then whatever the gain is in the sporting event, that's one thing that's happening, but it allows us to be able to show off the city. It allows us to be able to integrate that into the experience. So whether that means bringing it into the arena itself, and being able to have booths and exhibitions and being able to transform the arena itself into an experience of the country, and highlighting some of the key restaurants and art experiences that are happening there, or transforming the parking lot. But how do we get those things in front of visitors from the moment they get off the airplane to, every step along the way, so they are experiencing it? And we start to look at the countries and our cities as brands themselves, and we start to shift and market that. So I think there's so much room for that to happen if we can think beyond these things just being singular events that are happening, and we can really transform it. I had the experience of working when I was in music at All-Star Weekend several times, and just being able to see how everything transforms, and we have to really look at our cities in the same way.
So now, do you think that that's a shift in terms of how from sort of how we promote tourism events here? Because there are some events, that are destination events that we have on the continent. Is it more of the same, or do we have to shift in how we're doing this from a sports perspective in terms of creating that sort of longer experience, that long-term, affinity towards the brand?
I definitely think there's a shift that needs to happen, because essentially what we need to do is we need to be able to move to where we're not just marketing to people who are the sports fanatics, not just the sports fans who are going to come to the actual gaming event itself. So you have the people who are, your primary audience who are going to come to the gaming event itself. And then you have the people who maybe are not the hardcore fanatics, but are going to come because they want to come for the excitement of the whole thing. And the game is a part of that. But
Right.
We also need to market to those people who want to just come because there's something happening in Africa, and there's something that's happening in the city here, whether they are people who are located in other parts of the continent or located globally in other parts of the world. But the same way that you see other Formula One that happens, and people come and are just coming around everything that's happening surrounding it, that people look at it. So I think that's where we have to think outside of the box, is how do we market beyond those people who are just coming strictly for the game, and how do we get other people to come in, because that's when we start to hit the massive numbers, and when we start to hit the people who are coming around tourism that just happens around these events.
No, absolutely. And along those same lines, Shay, as a travel and lifestyle writer, you uniquely see the intersection of travel and tourism with sports and culture. So how do we better leverage media platforms or utilize writers to highlight these events while showcasing the destinations?
Oh, thank you for having me. I think the way to showcase a destination strictly for sports, you need the marketing. You need people to know. People want to come to Africa. People want, especially in the US, especially Black Americans, they want to see the continent, but it's not marketed towards that sector of the population. And I think if you're going to use sports, I know people travel for sports. I've been on a cruise with Cowboys fans, Dallas Cowboys fans, and New York Giants fans. And it's like the cruise is just center, it's a cruise. We're going to the Dominican Republic, but it's all about the football. And I think that using the media, you have to first get writers who truly have a connection, whether it's culturally, socially, to the continent. I think you need to start there. And basically, people will travel if you give them a reason to travel. I know I was in Malta, which is 5 minutes from North Africa, and I was there for the Grand Prix, and I wanted to come, but there was nothing to do. You know what I'm saying? There was nothing. Tunisia is right there. There was no extra reason for me to spend more money to come somewhere else. So I think that if you give people that reason and the commitment, like you were talking about from the government, to have that, it can't just be a one-off. It has to be, hey, for the next 5 to 10 years, we have to be committed to this event. And the first year, it'll probably be slow, but it's that social media, it's that word of mouth, it's the articles in the Travel and Leisures in Blue magazine that'll make people want to come there. So and I'll give you one more example. I also worked in music and entertainment. People go to Montreal Jazz Fest and happen to just be in Montreal. They'll go for the event. They wouldn't want to go to Montreal for any other reason, but they're going for the Montreal Jazz Fest. Meanwhile, the hotels are booked. The parks are full of food festivals. There's vendors making money. I've been to a music festival in Quebec City. I've never wanted to go to Quebec City in my life, but now it's like, wow, when I go to Canada, I'm going to stop by Quebec City because it's a beautiful place. So I think if you have that commitment to, we're going to have this every year, regardless of if 5,000 people show up or 50,000, they'll come. And like you said, you got to have that music, that food festival, that, an artist, NBA and rappers, that's right there for you. That's easy pickings. That's low hanging fruit. You can get that music there. You can get food there. You can get fashion there, but you have to have the commitment and start, spending dollars in, even if it's advertising, you know what I mean? To get an audience that truly respects the cultural aspect of being in Africa, not just, hey, we're here, let's go see giraffes.
Right. No, absolutely. And just speaking on the cultural aspects, Manyo, I know, you talked about how.
And I
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, there was a delay. Go for it.
Oh, no, I was going to say, you had spoken about the cultural aspect. So I was just wondering specifically if you can share some of the ways, because you are one of those, now you're a brand that is here. You've made a commitment to be here. You're going to be here every year, sort of like, what Shay was saying. Now, how are some of those ways that you are going to make those cultural intersections around music and fashion? Is there something that you can share with us in terms of some of the things that you'll be doing to that regard?
Sure. I mean, I feel like Michael, Autumn, Shay, Kyle are doing my work for me. Singing off the same song sheet about exactly what Michael said. All-Star Weekend, right? This is not just about basketball. Basketball, it's about once you're together, what do you do? How do you fellowship with each other? And it's through culture, it's through music, it's through fashion, it's through food, it's through all of those things. And that's where we feel basketball, unlike any other sport, really has that ability to do that, because our players, number one, are sort of on the cutting edge of youth culture, lifestyle. They are not afraid to express themselves. They're not afraid to be characters. And that's all something that is part of the DNA of basketball as a sport and part of the DNA of the NBA. And I think the other part that people here have talked about is the fact that from a marketing perspective, this isn't just about this being a destination event where for 3 days you bring people in and that's that. I think for the African continent, it's much more about symbolism, right? For the NBA to make that commitment, to put people on the ground, to be at the forefront of, moving in that direction in places that, people don't expect. Lagos, Nigeria, Kigali, Rwanda. So this isn't just like, okay, we're, coming through Joburg, maybe we'll hit, some countries in North Africa. We are going across the entire continent. And this also is about investing in, putting, like, we have physical offices, people. I live on the African continent, right? So it's not just about having an event where you fly in, you fly out, you extract. This is about really committing to investing in the economies. And we really, believe, and thankfully we've, had an incredible reception from many African governments that the sports and entertainment industry on the African continent is severely underdeveloped. And that sports and entertainment industries is, tied industry as well. All the same infrastructure is needed for that, right? So when we talk about the arena that Kyle is managing, that came out of conversations that we had with, the leadership in Rwanda, where we said to them, if you want to put Kigali on the map, right? There's currently no arena infrastructure where we could play an NBA game, where you can bring, Jay-Z, Beyonce, where you could, host comedy shows, where you could do all of these, great, incredible international events. Currently, when a promoter wants to, do an Africa tour, what do? They bring their act, they come to Joburg, they hit a couple spots in Joburg, maybe they hit Cape Town, and they leave the continent. They can't string together a series of events and, say, okay, let's go from, Joburg, and we'll do a show in Botswana, and we'll do a show in Kenya, we'll do a show here, which will make it economically viable to actually, capture that. And the African continent wants that. So that starts with infrastructure. But to Kyle's point, it's not about the white elephant. What they're doing in Rwanda is exactly the right model. You have a professional company come in that manages it properly, that turns it into a Madison Square Garden. MSG doesn't sit there, over the course of the year and just host Knicks games. Very often on a single day, it can host Knicks game, Rangers game, and a boxing match in the theater, right? So all of these things, show you that there is an incredible industry there that is completely under tapped, underdeveloped, underinvested in, and we, right, like we are the increasingly so the talent in the NBA. When you look at the EPL, Africans are the talent in the EPL. When you look at any sport, when you look at music, when you look at fashion, when you look at our culture and um, our essence is infusing everywhere globally. But we have to make sure that we are developing it at home locally for ourselves. And for us, that is what the BAL means. This isn't about, just flying in and flying out. This is truly about looking at African talent. And President Kagame said it best. He said, look, the African continent is known for its natural resources, right? Gold and diamonds, etc. What do? We take it in its raw form, we export it, value gets added in Antwerp or wherever else, and then it gets re-imported back onto the continent. What the BAL is doing instead is actually developing that talent here, creating a business model here on the African continent. And it's going to be of such high quality that when we say this is African, it means it's of quality. and of such quality that it will be showcased on ESPN, on all the global networks, back in the US, back in Europe, but it is of Africa, from Africa, and here on the African continent.
Just aside from growing the brand globally, I'm just curious as to the challenge for you specifically in terms of growing a fan base for basketball when you look at the top sports across the continent. Like, how hard do you see that being when you look at, it's soccer, football, rugby, all of those other sports? So how do you raise the visibility within the continent? Have you sort of strategically even thought about, from a regional perspective, how you're going to raise that level of awareness and love of the game?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the last 10 years have really been about developing the foundation and the infrastructure for the sport on the continent. Partnerships with FIBA, partnerships with all the basketball federations across the continent, launching junior NBA programs to get more kids exposed to the sport, building courts, increasing coaching, all of that work we've been doing for a long time now. What the BAL represents is taking it to the next level now, where there's actually a predictable pathway for kids to actually see their dreams. If I'm in high school and I'm playing, my only chance for success somewhere else. There's actually a pathway for achieving excellence on the African continent. Now, the good thing for us is, as much as you mentioned rugby and swimming, outside of South Africa, that's not really the case. It's football and it's basketball. Those are the top two sports across.
There's some other sports, Mano.
Yeah. I mean, look, they're
South Africa. I'm just saying, I know it's a challenge in terms of sort of breaking the known sort of top sports across the continent.
Sure. No, but they're 100%. They're two global sports, right? It's football, that's soccer,
Yes.
and it's basketball. And those are the two sports that really are embraced globally. But you're absolutely correct. When we say that basketball is number two, it's actually a very far number two from football. That is consumed, ubiquitously. It's everywhere. So there's definitely a big challenge that we have ahead of us. What I am very bullish about is the fact that the NBA brand and subsequently the BAL brand isn't just about the sport, as we've talked about. It's about lifestyle. It's about music and fashion, entertainment. Even if you're not a hardcore fan, when LeBron and his teammates, put on the clothes and they walk from the bus to the locker room, that becomes a fashion show, right? When they speak out on social justice issues, people listen. They have cultural clout that I think that rivals any other sport out there. So we think it gives us a great advantage and a huge door with which to allow casual and curious fans to be able to access the brand. And that's where also we feel that BAL, has that advantage, is that, yes, I mean, look, we are brand new. We haven't even launched yet, right? Yet, we are obviously important enough that the great Naledi has invited us to come here and talk about so that itself tells you that it's not just about sports. It's about fashion and music and entertainment and tourism and all of those things, and that gives us a great advantage, we feel, in being able to grow the brand.
No, thank you. And Adam, I'd like to kick it over to you, because when we talked about, it's not just sports, I always say that about tourism. Tourism is probably the only sector that touches everything, right? Whether you're talking about ICT, whether you're talking about agriculture, economic, it's one of the most important key drivers for economic development. But when we're looking at these personal touch points, how do we do a better job of using those cultural touch points, music and fashion and sports in this case that we're talking about, art to really help us with that messaging when we're trying to really showcase what an amazing continent and what Africa has to offer, what Africa has to uniquely offer.
See me throughout, are you saying like throughout tourism in general, how we use it?
Yes, yes, but through tourism in general, like as sports is one of those pillars, how do we use sports along with the music and the art and the fashion, all of those things that we're talking about to really, help showcase what we have to offer? Because I think you'll see it here and there, and I think it's almost a missed opportunity. For example, Coming to America, the movie that just came out, so much talk about the fashion, the South African designers in the movie. I'm not biased towards South Africa, despite popular belief, Banyo. But so much talk about that. So, that's an opportunity then to showcase the destination. And I felt there wasn't enough of that conversation about, what is African fashion? Who are some of the top, they're out there, but those stories aren't really being amplified in a really significant way. So what are some of the ways, or which should we be thinking about how to amplify that type of connectivity? Because that's a pathway right there. It's fashion, music. We talked about African music it's at the top of the global charts. There's a reason why Apple Music and Spotify have made significant, investments in African music, but I don't think that we're leveraging that from a tourism perspective to sell the destination. At least we're not maximizing it, I should say.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. First is just in terms of tourism, period, you just have to be paying attention to all of the trends. And there's so much that is constantly going on. Right now with the whole GameStop thing that happened on Reddit, they ended up then calling themselves, I forget what it was, something apes. And then it went to a bunch of them donating to like the gorillas here in Rwanda around this whole Fosse thing, because it came from this whole joke and going into that. And they ended up donating absurd amounts of money, a great way, to the Fosse Foundation here and around gorillas. And it was like, okay, are we maximizing that as Rwanda, as a destination? Are we paying attention to and there's so much that's always going on in all of these pockets, but we really have to pay attention, because that in and of itself was like, it was a huge moment, but it's happening in a silo, but it's happening in silos. All people who would come here if we then go back from Rwanda and put a meme out or a GIF out in front of them and say, and put Visit Rwanda on it, while they were posting all these pictures of how much money they had donated to specific gorillas they had adopted that were right here. And so I think there's all these things that are constantly happening. We saw the same thing happen with Black Panther. And, we saw the same thing happen with Black is King. And even when Beyonce put out the website, and on the website highlighted different fashion designers across the continent, how much are we taking advantage of that? And so I think that also means thinking outside of the box. And part of that too is sometimes it means really not just being innovative, but also pulling other minds in, because we cannot expect people to think about things that they've never seen a prototype for thinking about or an example for thinking about. So if people have not seen certain things happen in a certain way, and they've only been doing them in one way, and they only have these other examples that are very near and close to them, then we also have to pull in other minds so that we can think beyond just what's right here in our peripheral view. I think that's one thing that is key, and bringing people who have seen these other examples, and not to come in and culture impose on us, but to bring these other ideas and say, hey, are we thinking about this? Hey, how can we be innovative with this, and to work together versus coming in and just bringing things in. So I think that's one thing, because there's so much that is always happening. We had the Grammys that just happened, and seeing so many African artists pop up on the Grammys for different nominations and wins. And so how do we, but also that has to be relationships. And there's this constant conversation going on with the creative industry in Africa and around how we elevate the creative industry, how we professionalize the creative industry, and how we also pay homage and actually let these artists know, hey, not only does the government see what you're doing, but it's going to support. And that's a constant conversation that's going on across the continent. I've been in so many conversations. You talk about the tour around why there's no tours that are happening continent-wide with even just African artists, and we have the talent that is right here on the continent. So I think a lot of that has to be where we start to work hand in hand with that talent, and talent who makes it needs to come back and needs to say, hey, how can I tie in? And how do you integrate that into the campaigns that are around tourism? So I think a lot of that has to do the same way that we integrate other influencers, and being able to integrate those faces that we see and having that brand association happen closely, not just in the parentheses behind their name or in the comma marks behind their name in an article, but actually integrating into it. The other thing that I wanted to say about what you all were talking about earlier, Manya and Melody, around, and Shay, a little bit around, being able to market this to African Americans and to people globally, is what we have on that flip side of where we were talking about basketball and people on the continent not being, as into it as football, is that the rest of you look at the States, and especially talking about Black people in the States, like we are, right? And so what we have is this place of familiarity. And so it doesn't take the same level of marketing as it would with other things, because it's something that's already familiar, something people are already excited about, but how do we harness that to like the fullest extent? And then tie in these other music things and the names that they know, the T-Bus Savages, the Burna Boys and everybody else that they know, and tie in the new rising talent at the same time. And as well as like the more traditional cultural pieces, but really leveraging that this is something that people are already excited about. So it's just, you have to get it in front of them, like Shay was saying, but you have to put it in the right places to get it in front of people, and they will come. It's not a huge sell. You're not selling something that they're not familiar with. And thankfully, sports is something that is universal. You don't need language, just like music, but even better, because you're still, it's the same rules. You're running back and forth on a court. So it transcends all of the language barriers that we have in other things.
Of the Africa Tourism Association, Read Exhibitions, and Africa Travel Week. We really appreciate your valuable insights and are grateful for what you brought to the conversation today.